It's expected in a matter of hours the UK is going to have a new Labor government after 14 years of Conservative rule. Let's bring in financial entrepreneur and geopolitics expert Dr. Roger Gewolb. Roger, great to speak with you again. What does a Labor victory mean for the UK?
Many people are pretty bleak about it. It means they are saying open borders, tons more immigration, higher taxes, as is always the case with labor. They say more wokeism. It's incredible that we Brexited 4 years ago to get away from lefty, woke, rigid, nonsensical policies as they were seen. And now Europe has moved to the right and are acting like Brexiteers, with actually talk of some European countries actually exiting the EU now, whereas Britain is, the UK is heading towards total wokeism and a society that is just unrecognizable from what traditional Britain and its values have been.
Why do you think that is?
Poor leadership, basically. We've just had terrible leaders on both sides, and we still do. We have people who just are not leaders. They are managers and not necessarily very good managers. And I think that I would personally say that Labor's victory, if indeed it is a landslide, and that's not 100% certain yet, I can come back to that if you want. But I mean, I think that Labor's victory is more than anything a function of how angry people are at the Conservative Party, because the politicians who've led that party, especially recently, have manipulated, gaslighted, demeaned, mistreated over and over the public that elected them. They've been wholly irresponsible to the British electorate, and they aren't conservatives. They're as close to Labour as you can get. So, Gabriella, much of the media refers to them as the uni party. They don't even call them two parties anymore.
Let's talk about Rishi Sunak. It's hard to find an article where he's being praised. Almost all of them he's being pretty harshly criticised. What would you say his legacy will be?
Probably one of the worst prime ministers and worst political leaders in a very long time. Somebody who is just, despite all his photo opportunities, rolling up his sleeves and trying to be one of the lads, somebody who's just so out of touch with the country and its people. He puts on a good act of being, a man of the people, but his actions just belie that every time.
Well, look, that's tough, but I'm tough but fair. Let's talk about some of the issues with this election. Cost of living is a big one. How would a Starmer government balance social spending and also the issue of inflation?
I think if they were going to do something about the cost, it's very puzzling. If they were going to do something about the cost of living, if they were going to do something about inflation, if they were going to do something about interest rates that don't need to be as high as they are, you would have thought that they would have used that to beat the Tories over the head any time in recent years. But I mean, they've really been very silent about it all. They've talked about other things, if they've talked at all. I mean, they basically played a game, Labour, which obviously is a strategic game, where they haven't really come out with what their policies are or what their plans are, to the point that they've been criticized for being something of an empty vessel and have no plans and no ideas and no clue what they're going to do if they got into power after so long. But I mean, I think the game that they're playing is, if you don't put something out there, then people aren't going to be able to shoot at it. So it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell what they will do, but I would imagine they will not reverse the Tory policies on interest rates, inflation, and pretty much all the rest. They will simply raise taxes, especially to fund all sorts of climate change and other now kind of out of vogue issues. They'll bring those back, and everything pretty woke and pretty left wing, they will fund, and they'll just print money. And I don't think labor is ever worried about that.
What about foreign policy? And also, how would a Starmer-led Labor government deal with the anti-Israel marches that we've seen erupting at pro-Palestinian university encampments? Also, quite severe criminal attacks on Jewish businesses. How do you see this changing? Will the UK change its support of Israel?
Yes, I think they probably will, despite their protestations otherwise. I think it will not be good for Jews and not be good for Muslims, because Muslims are suffering from Islamophobia from the ordinary, sort of white British bloke in the street who's not very happy with the protests. And I know Muslims who tell me they go out and they get glared at now by British people, even though they're British themselves, and they don't like it either. I think it won't be very good for race relations, but they will, I think, keep the borders open to more and more people coming from countries for what they can get here, rather than any particular devotion to the United Kingdom. And I think relations with Israel will become worse. I think that Ukraine is another issue where they will probably keep giving them a lot of money, even though it seems that Zelensky is not going to win the war. And negotiations, I don't think Britain is enough of a factor to directly influence that, but I think that'll become problematic too. It's not good. I mean, I hope I'm very surprised. I want to be very surprised, but people are pretty scared. The Tories are saying that people are so frightened of Labour that they may still be able to stay in, because at the last minute in the voting booth, people are just going to say, I'm so scared of these guys, I'm still going to vote Tory.
Concerning times ahead. We'll stay across it with you. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has emphasised that immigration should be the biggest issue in the upcoming general election. Here he is.
If I paid you £70 now, would you admit that this country would be nothing without our rich history of immigration?
Well, I tell you what. And this is what's gone wrong. Because you talk about immigration, and it ran from after the war up until the millennium at net 30 to 40,000 a year. And yes, it worked. In fact, we had the most successful immigration policies of any country in the whole of Europe, no question. Now, it is so totally out of control. Just think about this. 2.5 million people have come in the last 2 years. You wonder why you can't get a house. You wonder why your rents have gone up 25% in 4 years. You wonder why our infrastructure is struggling. You wonder why we have to build a new house every 2 minutes just to cope with the numbers. And that's the issue. It's now running at numbers that are literally unimaginable and are diminishing the quality of life of everybody in this country. And frankly, this should be the biggest issue of this election.
He makes a lot of sense. Nigel Farage later declared a boycott of the BBC, accusing it of bias after that appearance on Friday night's Question Time. In a post to X, the 60-year-old wrote, "I've just been invited to appear, but I'm refusing until the BBC apologises for their dishonest Question Time audience. Our state broadcaster has behaved like a political actor throughout this election. Reform will be campaigning vigorously to abolish the licence fee." Roger, what's your take on this?
Well, I think the news cycle has moved on from that. I think that I think the lady is right about immigration. Immigration certainly has helped to build this country, America, many other countries, but a certain amount of immigration. Nigel is right that there's just a pandemonium going on now with illegal immigration, people who aren't processed, people who just come flooding in and can't be dealt with. That's the problem. It's not the question of, there's nothing wrong with, there's everything right with immigration. There's nothing wrong with controlled, monitored immigration that's done properly. But this has just gone out of hand, and I don't think that Labour will be able to do much more about it. Now, Nigel boycotting the BBC because of that allegedly rigged audience the other evening, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, he's far from the first person to accuse the Beeb of serious bias in all sorts of ways. But what has moved on in the news cycle, Gabriella, is that Nigel has come under fire, and Reform has come under fire for being a racist party. They were accused with a Channel 4 investigation of a man who called Rishi Sunak a terrible, vile, racist slur and said that immigrants should be used for target practice. And they found all sorts of people, who said horrible things. Now, actually, you can find that in any party, and it isn't necessarily a reflection on Reform, but the media wave has rather gone against him. And what I'm referring to that is new is that he has announced today, as released in several media outlets, that had he known that Reform was such a shambles and that people were not vetted as carefully as they should have been, and various other things, not that he would have thought twice about coming back, but that, he would have done something about it. He was shocked at the terrible shape the party is in. And so I think that their rush of voting, their huge momentum has been stopped in the last 24 hours. And I don't expect them to do as well in the election as I did yesterday.
I did see those reports. I don't know how I feel about that argument that Nigel Farage is shocked and Reform UK, he didn't realise it was as bad as it was, and that's what he inherited. I think making those claims is so close to the general election. I'm not sure how well that will go down with voters. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, one particular media outlet, and there may have been others, but that one particular media outlet referred to him as throwing Richard Tice, the man who has led Reform the past few years, under a bus. He threw Richard Tice under a bus. And I don't understand the strategy of him doing that and distancing himself from the Reform Party so close, so many hours before the election. I don't get it. I really can't understand how that would have benefited either Nigel or Reform. And Nigel is not a man who does things unthinkingly. So I haven't figured it out yet, but it's not good. And I don't think it's been helpful for Reform, all of this bad publicity, even though, as I say, I'm sure every party, I mean, I don't want Green Party people calling me up yelling at me, but I'm sure even the Green Party has people that say horrible things about executives of fossil fuel companies or capitalists, or, I mean, every party's got nutters in them, and you can't turn around and say that's a racist party. But the media has managed, because they really do go for Nigel, they have managed to make him a bit of a devil, and he's fought it off as best he can. But I don't understand this capitulation of saying, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it was, such a mess and so bad. Yeah.